Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But among the countless conflicts that rage across the galaxy, among the trillion souls who fight and die beneath alien stars, there are some beings whose names carry weight that transcends mere battlefields. Names that are whispered in fear across entire sectors. Names that make hardened warriors pause and check their weapons one more time. Names that represent not just a threat, but a promise of absolute annihilation. One such name belongs to an orc, and that name is Ghazghkull mag Uruk Thraka. To truly understand what this name means, we must first appreciate the scale of what we are discussing. The galaxy of the 41st millennium is vast beyond human comprehension. 100 billion stars blaze in the darkness, and around those stars orbit countless worlds where life struggles to survive against the endless horrors that lurk in the void. Humanity has spread across this galaxy, claiming millions of planets as their own, building an imperium that spans the entire Milky Way. They have developed technologies that can move ships faster than light, weapons that can crack open worlds, and armies that number in the trillions. And yet, against all of this power, this accumulated might of 10,000 years of human civilization, there rises a figure who threatens to burn it all to ash. Not through corruption like the forces of chaos, not through inevitable consumption like the Tyrannid swarms, not through the cold logic of extermination like the Necrons, but through something far more primal, through the simple, brutal joy of war itself. That the orcs are among the most numerous species in the galaxy. They infest every corner of the Milky Way, from the galactic core to the outer reaches where stars grow sparse. Wherever there is conflict, you will find greenskins, for they are drawn to violence as moths are drawn to flame. They are born for war, bred for war, and they die in war with songs of battle on their lips. To an orc, there is no greater joy than the crash of combat, the smell of smoke and blood, the exhilaration of crushing an enemy beneath your boot. But for all their numbers, for all their ferocity, the orcs have always been limited by a single weakness. They cannot stay united. Left to their own devices, they fracture into countless tribes and clans, fighting among themselves as readily as they fight their enemies. Great gatherings of orcs rise periodically, crashing against the defenses of other civilizations in waves of green fury, but they always eventually break apart. The infighting begins, the alliances crumble, the threat recedes until the next time. This is how it has always been. This is the natural order of things, until now. Picture, if you will, a being of immense size, a mountain of green muscle and scarred flesh, wrapped in plates of salvaged adamantium and crackling with barely contained psychic energy. His shadow falls across entire regiments. His voice carries the thunder of gods, and his eyes, one organic and one a glowing mechanical replacement, burn with a purpose that no orc should possess. For Ghazghkull is no ordinary greenskin. He is not simply the biggest, the strongest, or the most brutal of his kind, though he is certainly all of these things. He is something far more dangerous. He is a prophet. Among the billions of orcs who swarm across the galaxy like a green tide of destruction, Ghazghkull stands alone. Where other war bosses see only the immediate fight, the closest enemy to crush, the nearest loot to steal, Ghazghkull sees something more. He sees destiny. He sees a vision of every orc in existence united under a single banner, their combined power so great that even the gods themselves would be forced to take notice. He sees the galaxy burning with green fire from end to end, the screams of a billion worlds harmonizing into a single, eternal war cry, and he intends to make that vision reality. But here is where our story becomes truly fascinating, truly terrifying. For Ghazghkull is not pursuing some unique dream. He is not the first to walk this path. While 8,000 years before he drew his first breath, another rose to threaten the very existence of humanity. Another gathered the orcs into an unstoppable green tide. Another came so close to extinguishing the light of the Imperium that even now, millennia later, the wounds have not fully healed. They called that one the Beast, and the dark truth that keeps inquisitors awake in the depths of the night, the revelation that has ancient farseers staring into the swirling patterns of fate with growing dread, is this: Ghazghkull is becoming the Beast. Not metaphorically, not spiritually. The very name he bears, Mag Uruk Thraka, when translated from the guttural language of the Greenskins, means the same thing that the Beast proclaimed to its enemies as it tore apart the defenses of Terra itself. It means, I am slaughter. So settle in. Dear listener, dim the lights if you wish. Pour yourself something warm to drink and let the quiet hum of the universe wash over you. For we are about to explore one of the most significant figures in the entire 41st millennium. We shall trace the path of a lowly orc boy who took a bolt round to the skull and somehow emerged as the prophet of his race. We shall walk the blood-soaked fields of Armageddon, witness the horror of the War of the Beast, and peer into a future where the galaxy itself might drown in an endless green tide. This is the story of Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. This is the story of how one orc might become the doom of everything. Before we can truly understand what Ghazghkull represents, what he is becoming, we must first understand what came before. We must journey back through the mists of time, and back beyond the great wars of the 41st millennium, back even beyond the catastrophe of the Horus heresy that shattered humanity's golden dream. We must travel to the 32nd millennium, to an era when the Imperium was still recovering from that great betrayal, but had begun to find its footing once more. This was an age of relative peace. The traitor legions had been driven into the eye of terror. The various Xenos threats that would later plague humanity had been pushed back to the galactic frontier. The stagnation and decay that would come to define the Imperium in later millennia had not yet fully set in. Humanity was rebuilding. Humanity was growing stronger. Humanity believed, perhaps foolishly, that the worst was behind them. They were wrong. In the year 544 of the 32nd millennium, yet something emerged from the galactic depths that would shake the very foundations of the Imperium. It began with whispers, with scattered reports from frontier worlds of orc activity, unlike anything seen before. These were not the familiar raiding parties or localized invasions that humanity had long since learned to counter. This was something organized, something unified, something that spoke of a terrifying intelligence behind the green tide. And then the attack moons arrived. Imagine, if you can, planetoid-sized weapons platforms, artificial constructs built by orc mechboys whose genius had been amplified to impossible heights. These attack moons were not merely battle stations. They were symbols of a technological sophistication that even the Adeptus Mechanicus could not match. They could teleport across the galaxy, or they could devastate entire star systems, and they descended upon the Imperium in numbers that defied comprehension. At the head of this apocalyptic force was the creature the Imperium would come to know simply as the Beast. Let us pause for a moment to consider what the Imperium faced in those dark days. Remember that this was an era of relative peace and prosperity. The horrors of the Horus heresy were still fresh in memory, but humanity had begun to heal. The traitor legions had been driven back. The Astronomicon still blazed bright, guiding ships through the treacherous currents of the warp. The High Lords of Terror ruled an empire that seemed to be growing stronger with each passing generation. The people of the Imperium believed they had survived the worst. They believed that the nightmare was ending. They looked to the future with something approaching hope, and then the attack moons came, and hope died screaming. The first reports were dismissed as exaggeration or panic. When frontier commanders sent word of orc forces unlike anything they had ever encountered, their superiors assumed that battle stress had clouded their judgment. When whole worlds went dark, their populations erased in a matter of days, the High Lords assumed it was merely another Xenos incursion that would be contained and crushed like all the others. They were catastrophically wrong. The Beast was unlike any orc that had come before. Standing as tall as a hab block, with tusks the size of tree trunks and armor so massive that he was initially mistaken for a walking battle fortress. The beast represented the pinnacle of orc evolution. He was not merely strong. He was intelligent. He could speak perfect Gothic, the language of humanity, and he did so to taunt his enemies as he crushed them beneath his feet. He understood strategy and logistics in ways that orcs simply should not comprehend. He had unified the entire greenskin race under his banner, and he intended to break humanity forever. The war that followed nearly succeeded. Let me be clear about what this means. The War of the Beast nearly ended the Imperium of Man, not in some distant future, not in a hypothetical scenario, but right there in the 32nd millennium, humanity came within a hair's breadth of extinction at the hands of the greenskins. World after world fell to the green tide. The orcs swept through imperial space like a plague, their numbers seeming to multiply with every victory. Hive worlds that had stood for millennia were reduced to burning rubble. Forge worlds that produced the weapons of the imperial war machine were overrun, their ancient knowledge lost forever. Billions died, then tens of billions, then hundreds of billions. The death toll climbed so high that the Administratum eventually stopped counting. The Space Marine chapters, those legendary warriors who had stood against the forces of chaos during the Horus Heresy, found themselves facing an enemy they could not stop. The Imperial Fists, the proud sons of Rogel Dawn, who had held the walls of terror against Horus himself, were effectively annihilated. Their chapter master, Corland, became the last son of Dawn, watching his brothers fall one by one in desperate attempts to stop the unstoppable. Other chapters fared little better. What the cream of humanity's warrior elite was being ground to dust against an enemy that seemed to have no weakness. Meanwhile, the High Lords of Terror, those supreme rulers of the Imperium, descended into squabbling and infighting even as an attack moon appeared in orbit above Earth itself. Rather than uniting against the existential threat, they maneuvered for political advantage, each one trying to ensure their own survival at the expense of their colleagues. It was a display of human weakness at the worst possible moment. And through it all, the beast watched and laughed. It took the Primarch Vulcan, one of the Emperor's own genetically engineered sons, to face the beast in single combat. And even he, one of the mightiest warriors the galaxy had ever known, could not truly defeat the creature. Their battle ended in mutual destruction. Both warriors consumed in an explosion that should have ended the threat forever. But here is where the true horror was revealed. The beast was not one orc. It was six prime orcs, each one a beast in its own right, each commanding a legion of greenskins that would have been considered a galaxy-threatening invasion force on its own. The Imperium had killed one. 5 remained. And the one that Vulcan had faced was not even the mightiest among them. The true beast of beasts, the largest and most powerful, had yet to take the field. The war dragged on. More Space Marine chapters were ground to dust against the green tide. Desperate measures were employed, including the creation of the Death Watch, those elite Xenos hunters drawn from every chapter, specifically formed to combat this threat. Sisters of Silence, or those rare women born without souls, were used to create a reverse psychic effect that could disrupt the orc's gestalt consciousness. In the end, through sacrifice and desperation and losses that would echo through millennia, the Imperium prevailed. The 6 prime orcs were slain. The attack moons were destroyed. The orcs were scattered and broken, their civilization set back thousands of years. But in the aftermath, as the survivors tried to comprehend what had happened, the ancient Farseer Eldrad Ulthran of Craftworld Ulthwe spoke words that would prove prophetic. "Beasts never die," he said to the assembled seers of his kind. "They are only banished. The cry of Mag Uruk Thraka echoes still in the other sea. Should one rise again, the greenskins may yet fulfill their original purpose." He was already seeing visions of the future. He was already hearing a name that would not become famous for another 8,000 years. He was already seeing Ghazghkull, The planet Urk was not a significant world by any measure. It was a minor orc-held territory on the galactic frontier, one of countless such worlds where greenskins multiplied and fought among themselves, occasionally spilling outward to menace nearby Imperial systems before being pushed back. The sun that warmed Urk was dying, its light growing dimmer with each passing century, its occasional flares bathing the surface in lethal radiation that even the hardy orcs struggled to survive. The world itself was a brutal place even by orc standards. Its surface was covered with the ruins of countless minor wars, the twisted metal and bleached bones of generations of greenskins who had fought and died for territory that meant nothing in the grand scheme of the galaxy. Crude settlements dotted the landscape, each one ruled by whatever warboss had most recently proven himself the strongest. Alliances formed and shattered with the regularity of the seasons, if Urk could be said to have seasons at all. The orcs who lived there knew nothing of the wider galaxy. They did not know about the Imperium of Man that claimed sovereignty over the stars. They did not know about the other civilizations that struggled for survival against the endless threats of the void. They knew only that there were enemies to fight, loot to steal, and rivals to crush. It was a simple existence, brutal and short, but it was all they had ever known. As it was on this unremarkable world, in a time that would have been approximately 9 years before the Second War for Armageddon, that our true story begins. Ghazghkull was born into the Goth clan, one of the most brutal and warlike of all orc cultures. The Goths pride themselves on being the toughest, the most aggressive, the most devoted to the pure joy of combat. Where other clans might favor cunning or looting, or the construction of elaborate war machines, the Goths believe in one simple truth. Nothing beats a good, solid fight. Their armor is black, their mood is perpetually violent, and their idea of a good time is wading through enemy ranks with nothing but a chopper and a mean disposition. But in those early days, Ghazghkull was nobody special. He was just another orc boy, one of countless thousands who served in the armies of warboss Dregmek of the Death Skulls. He had no particular standing, no remarkable achievements, no indication that he would one day become the most influential orc in the galaxy. He was simply another green body, destined to fight and die in wars that would be forgotten as soon as they ended. At some point before Ghazghkull's birth, the Dark Angel Space Marines had raided Urk. Their mission was to disrupt the orc forces building up there, and they had succeeded in devastating the greenskin presence. But they had also left behind automated defense systems, bunkers, and turrets that continued to function long after the Space Marines departed. These facilities became targets for the disorganized orcs who remained, who saw them as sources of valuable loot and good fights. It was during one such raid that Ghazghkull's destiny was forged. The young orc was part of a mob assaulting one of these abandoned facilities when the automated defenses activated. Bolter rounds tore through the greenskin ranks with brutal efficiency. Most orcs who were hit simply died, their bodies torn apart by the explosive mass-reactive shells that Space Marines favor. But Ghazghkull was both unlucky and impossibly lucky at the same time. A single bolt round struck him directly in the skull. The impact was catastrophic. The shell destroyed approximately 30% of Ghazghkull's skull and pulped a significant portion of his brain. By any reasonable standard, this should have been instantly fatal, even for an orc whose physiology allows them to survive injuries that would kill any other species several times over. This was a wound that should have meant the end. But Ghazghkull did not die. Somehow, against all odds, he clung to life. His ruined body was found by a figure who would prove almost as significant to his story as Ghazghkull himself, the notorious pain boy known as Mad Doc Grotznik. Grotznik was, even by orc standards, quite insane. Where other pain boys practiced their crude surgery, with at least some attention to keeping their patients alive, Grotznik approached his work with a level of experimental enthusiasm that made even other orcs nervous. He was known for replacing perfectly functional body parts with mechanical substitutes, simply because he wanted to see what would happen. He had been driven from multiple tribes for his dangerous experiments, and when he found Ghazghkull's broken body, he saw not a dying orc, but an opportunity. The surgery that followed was nothing short of remarkable. Grotnik replaced the destroyed portions of Ghazghkull's skull with plates of adamantium, the strongest metal known to exist. He filled the gaps in the orc's brain with mechanical components and crude neural interfaces. He worked for hours, days perhaps, reconstructing a being that by all rights should have been dead. And then, despite all his efforts, Ghazghkull died anyway. At least, that is what Grotnik believed. The orc showed no signs of life, no response to stimuli, no indication that the surgery had been anything but a failure. Disappointed but philosophical about the outcome, Grotnik did what any pain boy would do with a failed experiment. He dumped Ghazghkull's body in a rubbish heap behind his operating shed and moved on to other projects. The body was discovered by a nameless grot, one of the smaller, weaker greenskins who served their larger cousins in a state of near-constant servitude. This grot was searching through the refuse for anything valuable, any scrap that might be traded or used to avoid a beating. Instead, he found a corpse, and then the corpse opened its eye. In that moment, something passed between the dying orc and the terrified grot. Later, the grot would describe it as a vision, a glimpse of something vast and green and terrible. He saw the galaxy burning. He saw every orc in existence united under a single banner. He saw something called the Great Green tearing its way into the material realm, a manifestation of orc power so immense that reality itself would bend before it. He saw the destiny of Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. What happened to Ghazghkull during those moments of death, or near death, has been the subject of much speculation among those who study the orcs. The prevailing theory is that the damage to his brain, combined with the adamantium plates that Grotnik implanted, somehow unlocked latent psychic abilities that Ghazghkull possessed without knowing. Orcs are, as a species, fundamentally psychic beings. Their technology works because they believe it works. Their gods, Gork and Mork, are real entities formed from the collective psychic energy of the greenskin race. But this power is usually diffuse, spread across billions of individuals. In Ghazghkull, it became concentrated. He would later describe what he experienced as communion with Gork and Mork themselves. The twin gods of the orcs, one cunningly brutal and the other brutally cunning. Spoke to their chosen prophet and showed him what must be done. They revealed to him a vision of the future that burned itself into his reconstructed brain with such intensity that it would never fade. They told him that the orcs had forgotten their purpose, that they had grown complacent in their endless small wars, that they had lost sight of the destiny that was theirs by right. The whole galaxy was meant to burn green. Every star, every world, every civilization was supposed to fall before the orcs. That was what they had been created for, in the long ago times before memory, by the old ones who had built them as weapons of war. The orcs were meant to be the ultimate warriors, the final argument in any cosmic conflict, and they had failed in that purpose. They had become scattered, divided, content to fight among themselves rather than conquering all that lay before them. This vision, seared into Ghazghkull's reconstructed consciousness with fire and pain, was more than a dream. It was a command, a mandate from the highest possible authority. The gods themselves had spoken, and their message was clear. The orcs had forgotten who they were. They had forgotten what they were meant to be. And Ghazghkull, touched by divine power, chosen as the prophet of his race, was meant to remind them. The implications of this vision cannot be overstated. For the first time in recorded history, an orc was thinking beyond the immediate gratification of combat. Ghazghkull was not simply seeking the next fight, the next conquest, the next opportunity for violence. He was pursuing a goal that would take decades, perhaps centuries, to achieve. He was building towards something that no other orc had ever attempted: the unification of his entire species. Consider what this would mean. The orcs are the most numerous species in the galaxy. They breed rapidly, mature quickly, and require minimal resources to survive and thrive. In any given sector of space, there are likely billions of greenskins, fighting each other or whatever non-orc species they encounter. If even a fraction of these disparate forces could be united under a single banner, focused on a single goal, the resulting army would be effectively unstoppable. This was what Gork and Mork wanted. This was what they had chosen Ghazghkull to create. Ghazghkull was chosen to change that. When he fully awoke from his death-like state, Ghazghkull was transformed. The lowly orc boy was gone, as replaced by something that burned with divine purpose. He declared himself the prophet of Gork and Mork, the vessel through which the gods would speak to their people. He claimed to hear their voices constantly, thundering in his adamantium-reinforced skull, guiding his every action toward the glorious destiny that awaited. His first act was to give the grot who had found him a name and a purpose. That nameless creature became Makari, and Ghazghkull swore him to eternal service as his banner-bearer. Using Ghazghkull's own blood and a scrap of metal, Makari created the first record of the prophet's vision, a document that would become known as Da Lucky Stick. Ghazghkull also gifted Makari with a necklace made from fragments of the very bolt shell that had nearly killed him, a token of what was, for an orc, unprecedented generosity. And then Ghazghkull went to work. He made his way to Rustspike, the shantytown headquarters of Warboss Dregmek, and declared that the current leader was a disgrace to the gods. Dregmek, he proclaimed, had wasted good orcs in futile wars against machines when there were far greater foes to be conquered. The greenskin race deserved better leadership. It deserved Ghazghkull. Dregmek's response was to open fire with every weapon at his disposal. What happened next became legend among the orcs of Urk. Every shot that Dregmek fired somehow missed Ghazghkull. Bullets that should have torn him apart went wide. Energy blasts that should have vaporized him struck everything except their intended target. It was as if the universe itself was protecting this strange, proclamatory orc from harm. Some of the watching greenskins had seen many things in their brutal lives, but they had never seen anything like this. With Dregmek's ammunition exhausted and his confidence shattered, Ghazghkull moved in. The fight that followed was not really a fight at all. Ghazghkull systematically dismantled the warboss, taking his time, savoring each blow, reducing the former leader to a pile of twitching meat, while the assembled orcs watched in horrified fascination. When it was done, Ghazghkull stood atop the ruins of his predecessor and declared that a new era had begun. Within 6 years, he had risen from a dead orc in a trash heap to the supreme warboss of his tribe, and he was just getting started. The events that followed seemed almost designed by fate to propel Ghazghkull toward his destiny. Urk's dying sun began its final death throes, in sending out solar flares that bathed the planet in lethal radiation. Millions of orcs died, their tough bodies finally overwhelmed by the constant bombardment. It became clear that remaining on Urk meant extinction. And then, as if in answer to Ghazghkull's need, a massive space hulk appeared in orbit. Space hulks are among the strangest phenomena in the galaxy. They are conglomerations of derelict vessels fused together over millions of years as they drift through the warp. Some contain technology from humanity's lost golden age. Others hold relics from alien civilizations that no longer exist. All of them are dangerous, filled with the accumulated hazards of countless shipwrecks and the creatures that have taken up residence within their twisted corridors. Ghazghkull saw the space hulk and proclaimed it a sign from Gork and Mork. The gods, he declared, had sent this vessel to carry their chosen people away from the dying world and toward greater glory. The orcs had to escape Urk, and this hulk would be their deliverance. But first, they had to claim it. Under Ghazghkull's leadership, the orcs of Urk constructed crude rockets to carry them to the space hulk in orbit. This was no small feat. Greenskins have notoriously short attention spans, and convincing them to work on long-term projects rather than fighting is usually impossible. But Ghazghkull possessed something that no other warboss had, a vision that the orcs could actually believe in. He told them of the glory that awaited, of the endless wars that they would wage across the stars, of the galaxy that would tremble at their approach, and somehow impossibly they listened. Yet the Hulk proved to be infested with demons. The creatures of the warp had made their home in the twisted corridors, and they did not appreciate the arrival of millions of greenskin invaders. What followed was a running battle through the depths of the Space Hulk. Orcs fighting against entities that defied physical laws and fed on fear and suffering. It was exactly the kind of fight that Ghazghkull wanted. At the heart of the Hulk, the orcs found a massive warp rift, a tear in reality that pulsed with chaotic energy. Standing before it was a creature that would have made most warriors flee in terror, a bloodthirster, one of the greater demons of the blood god Khorne. These beings are among the most fearsome entities in existence, towering avatars of rage and violence that have slaughtered entire armies. Ghazghkull fought it alone. The battle that followed was witnessed by thousands of greenskins, and they would speak of it for generations. The prophet of Gork and Mork matched the demon blow for blow, his power claw tearing through its brass armor, his bellowing war cries drowning out its roars of fury. In the end, Ghazghkull hurled the bloodthirster back through the warp rift and sealed it closed with a headbutt so powerful that it cracked the very fabric of reality. Then he turned to the assembled orcs and warned the gods of chaos to send something bigger next time. The Space Hulk was renamed World Killer, and Ghazghkull ordered it into the warp toward destinations unknown. He did not know where they were going. He did not need to know. Gork and Mork would guide them to where they needed to be, and so, drifting through the nightmarish realm between reality and madness, Ghazghkull and his followers journeyed toward a world that had no idea what was coming, a world called Armageddon. Armageddon was one of the most important worlds in the Imperium, a massive hive world located in the Segmentum Solar. It served as a critical manufacturing center and strategic asset. Its population numbered in the billions, packed into towering hive cities that stretched toward polluted skies. Its factories produced weapons and vehicles for the Imperial war machine on a scale that few worlds could match. Losing Armageddon would be a blow that the Imperium could ill afford, which is why the arrival of Ghazghkull's Space Hulk caused such immediate panic. Imperial sensors detected World Killer as it emerged from the warp in the Armageddon system. Yet the Hulk was massive, bristling with weapons that had been salvaged and upgraded during the journey through the Imperium. Its arrival shattered the system's orbital defenses with contemptuous ease, destroying satellites and attack craft that might have slowed a lesser invasion. Desperate messages were transmitted across the void, calling for aid that would take weeks or months to arrive. The orcs did not wait. A month after entering the Armageddon system, Ghazghkull's forces began their descent. It was the day of the feast of the Emperor's Ascension in 941 of the 41st Millennium, a holy day throughout the Imperium, when billions celebrated the moment the Emperor ascended to the Golden Throne. On this most sacred of occasions, the skies of Armageddon turned green with the contrails of orc landing craft. What followed would become known as the Second War for Armageddon. Armageddon. The very name carries weight in the Imperium, for it is a world of immense strategic importance.
You know, what I find genuinely fascinating about Ghazghkull is that he represents something rare in this setting. Most faction leaders are driven by duty, survival, or corruption, but Ghazghkull, he's driven by pure, unshakable faith in a vision only he can see. And honestly, that's what makes him more relatable than half the Imperium's saints. He saw something greater than himself and dedicated everything to making it real. Whether you're an orc player or a fan of the lore, or just someone who appreciates a good underdog turned legend story, there's something almost inspiring about watching this nobody from a backwater planet slowly becoming the single greatest threat in the galaxy. The sheer audacity of it is incredible. But anyways, let's get back to the lore.
Situated in the Segmentum Solar, the heart of human-controlled space, Armageddon is one of the most heavily industrialized planets in the entire Imperium. Its hive cities, those massive constructions that reach toward the polluted sky like mountains of metal and concrete, house billions of souls. Its factories produce weapons, vehicles, and equipment on a scale that few worlds can match. The loss of Armageddon would not merely be a strategic setback, it would be a hammer blow to the Imperium's ability to wage war. More than this, Armageddon occupies a position of psychological significance. It is a symbol of imperial power and resilience. Here, previous invasions have tested the world, and previous invaders have been driven back. The people of Armageddon are proud, hardened by generations of conflict, accustomed to fighting for their survival. To see their world fall would send shockwaves through the entire Imperium. This was the prize that Ghazghkull sought. This was the target that Gork and Mork had guided him toward. The initial stages of the invasion went catastrophically for the defenders. The overlord of Armageddon, a nobleman named Hermann von Straub, proved utterly incompetent in the face of the Orc onslaught. He had ignored every warning of the approaching threat, dismissed the reports of system monitors, and refused to believe that mere Orcs could threaten his domain. His arrogance cost millions of lives. The Greenskins tore through the planetary defenses with brutal efficiency. Their forces split into 5 tribal groups, each one a massive army in its own right, spreading across Armageddon's continents like a cancer. Hive cities that had stood for millennia fell in days. The population fled in panic, only to be caught between advancing Orc armies and cut down without mercy. But there was one man who refused to accept defeat. Commissar Sebastian Yarrick was everything that von Straub was not. He was a veteran of countless campaigns, a hardened soldier who had spent his life fighting the enemies of humanity. When von Straub banished him to Hive Hades for contradicting orders, Yarrick did not despair. He immediately set about organizing the defense of the Hive, turning refugees into soldiers and factory workers into warriors. And when Ghazghkull's forces arrived at Hades' Hive, they found something they had not expected, an enemy that refused to break. Time and again, the Orcs attacked. Time and again, they were repelled. Yarrick seemed to be everywhere at once, rallying faltering defenders, executing cowards, leading counterattacks that pushed the Greenskins back from positions they had already claimed. He became a legend among both humans and Orcs, a figure of seemingly supernatural determination. The Orcs began calling him Old Baelai, a reference to rumors that he could kill with a glance. Some said he had torn out an Orc's eye and grafted it into his own skull. Others claimed he was unkillable, that no weapon could bring him down. The truth was more mundane, but no less impressive. Yarrick was simply a man who refused to accept defeat, whose iron will could inspire miracles from ordinary soldiers. Ghazghkull noticed. The prophet of Gork and Mork had never encountered a human quite like Yarrick before. Most of them broke quickly, their courage failing in the face of Orc savagery. But this one, this old Baelai, was different. He fought with the kind of determination that Ghazghkull respected, the kind of warrior spirit that made battle worthwhile. For the first time in his career of conquest, Ghazghkull found himself genuinely interested in a human opponent. The two finally met in combat during the height of the siege of Hades' Hive. Ghazghkull had come to the front lines personally, eager to face this legendary commissar who had become such an annoyance. The battle that followed was intense and brutal. Ghazghkull's massive form loomed over the comparatively tiny human, his power claw crackling with enough energy to tear through tank armor. Yarrick fought back with everything he had. His power fist, a gift from the Adeptus Mechanicus, struck with enough force to stagger even the massive war boss. His resolve never wavered, even as Ghazghkull's blows left him broken and bleeding. When the fight finally ended, Yarrick lay at death's door, his body shattered, but his spirit unbroken. Ghazghkull could have killed him easily. One more blow would have ended the commissar's life forever, but the war boss hesitated. There was something about this human, something that made him valuable alive. Killing him would be easy. Finding another opponent worthy of such respect would be much harder. So Ghazghkull left Yarrick alive. As surrounded by the corpses of orcs that the Commissar had slain even in his final moments of consciousness. It was a decision that would have profound consequences for both of them. The siege of Hades' hive had bought the Imperium precious time. Reinforcements finally arrived in the form of 3 Space Marine chapters: the Blood Angels, the Salamanders, and the Ultramarines. Lord Commander Dante of the Blood Angels took command of all Imperial forces, immediately ordering the arrest of von Straub for his criminal incompetence. The tide began to turn. The Space Marines brought with them not just firepower, but tactical expertise and leadership that the scattered Imperial forces desperately needed. Coordinated counter-offensives began pushing the orcs back. Ghazghkull's advance, which had seemed unstoppable, began to slow and then reverse. But the prophet of Gork and Mork was not concerned. This war, he realized, had never been about conquering Armageddon. It had been about something far more valuable. He had learned how the Imperium responded to a major invasion. He had discovered their strengths and their weaknesses. He had tested their greatest warriors and found one, at least, who was worthy of respect. Armageddon had been a lesson. The next war would be the final exam. When the orcs finally retreated from Armageddon, they left behind millions of dead greenskins and a planet that would never fully recover. But they also left with knowledge that no amount of violence could have provided. Ghazghkull understood his enemy now. He knew how they fought, how they organized, how they could be overwhelmed. And he knew that one day he would return. While the second war for Armageddon was over, but the war between Ghazghkull and the Imperium had only just begun. The relationship between Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka and Commissar Sebastian Yarrick is one of the most unusual in the entire history of the 41st millennium. It transcends the normal categories of enmity and hatred, becoming something far more complex. They are, in a very real sense, defined by each other. Neither would be who they are without the existence of the other. To understand this relationship, we must first understand commissars. These men and women serve as the Imperium's enforcers of discipline and morale. They are attached to Imperial Guard units, not to lead them in the traditional sense, but to ensure that those units fight with the fanaticism that the Emperor demands. A commissar has the authority to execute any soldier who shows cowardice, disobedience, or disloyalty. They are feared by their own troops, almost as much as they are feared by the enemy. But Yarrick was never an ordinary commissar. Where others ruled through fear alone, Yarrick inspired genuine loyalty. He led from the front, sharing the dangers faced by the men and women under his command. He was a brilliant tactician, capable of seeing opportunities that others missed and exploiting them with ruthless efficiency. And he possessed a personal courage that seemed to border on the superhuman. When the orcs first came to Armageddon, Yarrick was already a legend among the Imperial Guard. By the time the Second War ended, he had become a legend among the orcs as well. For Yarrick, Ghazghkull represents the ultimate enemy. The war boss is everything the Commissar has spent his life fighting against. A Xenos threat of unprecedented power, a being who has killed millions of Imperial citizens. A monster who threatens everything that Yarrick holds sacred. After the Second War for Armageddon, Yarrick dedicated his remaining years to one purpose: hunting down and destroying Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. But for Ghazghkull, Yarrick represents something quite different. In the entire galaxy, filled with trillions of humans, Ghazghkull found exactly one who was worth fighting. One who did not break or flee or surrender. One who stood against him with the kind of determination that orcs respect above all other qualities. Yarrick was not just an enemy. He was a rival, a worthy opponent. Almost, in the strange way that orcs understand such things, a friend. Yet this dynamic would play out in the years between the Second and Third Wars for Armageddon in ways that defied all logic. After retreating from Armageddon, Ghazghkull began planning his next move. But the visions from Gork and Mork were becoming more frequent and more intense, often accompanied by blinding headaches that would have incapacitated any normal being. The gods were growing impatient. Armageddon had been a distraction. a detour from the true path. Ghazghkull needed to think bigger. He needed to set his sights on goals that would make Armageddon look like a minor skirmish. But first, there was unfinished business. Ghazghkull set course for the Golgotha system, a resource-rich region that could serve as a staging ground for future operations. His forces conquered the system with their usual efficiency, establishing factories and gathering the materials needed for an even larger war. It was here that Commissar Yarrick finally caught up with him. Yarrick had not remained idle after Armageddon. The moment he had recovered from his injuries, he had begun tracking Ghazghkull's movements. He called in every favor he was owed, requisitioned whatever forces he could acquire, and set out on a personal crusade to end the Orc menace once and for all. When his fleet arrived in the Golgotha system, Yarrick believed he finally had Ghazghkull cornered. He was wrong. The Battle of Golgotha was a disaster for the Imperial forces. Ghazghkull had been expecting pursuit. He had prepared accordingly. The Imperial fleet was devastated, their ground forces overwhelmed by Orc numbers that they had not anticipated. Yarrick fought with his usual determination, but even his legendary willpower could not overcome the sheer weight of greenskin bodies that crashed against his lines. In the end, Yarrick was captured. For most humans, falling into Orc hands meant a swift and brutal death, or worse, being kept alive for entertainment in fighting pits where captured slaves were torn apart for greenskin amusement. But Yarrick's fate was different. Ghazghkull ordered that the Commissar be brought before him personally. The conversation that followed has been reconstructed from various sources, none of them entirely reliable. What we know for certain is that Ghazghkull spent weeks with his captive, not torturing him in the conventional sense, but engaging in something far stranger. He talked. He explained his visions, his plans, his understanding of the galaxy and its destiny. And he treated Yarrick not as a prisoner, but as an audience. And then he let him go. Ghazghkull's reasoning, as far as it can be understood, was that killing Yarrick would be a waste. The Commissar was too good a fighter, too worthy an opponent to simply execute. Moreover, Ghazghkull had decided to return to Armageddon for a proper rematch. And for that rematch to be satisfying, he needed Yarrick to be there, leading the defense, giving the Orcs a real challenge. So Ghazghkull told Yarrick exactly what he was planning. He explained that he would return to Armageddon in 57 years with an even larger force. He made it clear that he wanted Yarrick to organize the defense so that the resulting battle would be truly epic. And then he released the Commissar and let him go free. It was, by any rational analysis, an insane decision. As Ghazghkull had effectively warned his enemy of an incoming attack decades in advance. He had given the Imperium time to prepare, to fortify, to gather reinforcements. Any strategist would have considered this suicidal, but Ghazghkull was not a normal strategist. He was the prophet of Gork and Mork, and his gods wanted a proper fight. They did not want easy victories or conquered worlds. They wanted war, endless, glorious, apocalyptic war. And for that, you needed enemies who could actually fight back. Yarrick, for his part, took the warning exactly as Ghazghkull intended. He returned to the Imperium and immediately began preparing for the coming storm. He advocated for the fortification of Armageddon with a passion that bordered on obsession. He trained troops, stockpiled supplies, and prepared for a war that he knew was coming with absolute certainty. 57 years to the day after the Second War for Armageddon, Ghazghkull kept his promise. The Third War for Armageddon began in 998 of the 41st Millennium, and it made everything that had come before look like a minor border skirmish. To understand the scale of what Ghazghkull had assembled, we must step back and appreciate the sheer logistics involved. Orc invasions are normally chaotic affairs, with warbands arriving haphazardly, fighting each other as often as they fight the enemy, and generally failing to coordinate their efforts in any meaningful way. This is why the Imperium has been able to defeat greenskin incursions that seemed overwhelming on paper. The Orcs defeat themselves through their own inability to stay focused. But Ghazghkull had learned from his first campaign on Armageddon. He had spent 57 years preparing for this moment, forging alliances, acquiring resources, and building an invasion force that would not fall apart at the first sign of difficulty. He had made deals with other powerful war bosses, trading access to his teleportation technology in exchange for their warriors and their loyalty. He had gathered tribes from across the galaxy, using his reputation as the prophet of Gork and Mork to convince them that joining his crusade was the will of the gods themselves. The result was an armada beyond anything the Imperium had ever faced from a single Orc force. The fleet that Ghazghkull brought to the Armageddon system was the largest Orc armada ever assembled against a single world. Millions of ships, from massive space hulks to crude attack craft barely capable of atmospheric flight, descended upon the system in numbers that defied comprehension. The Imperial Navy defenders, despite decades of preparation, found themselves outnumbered 6-1. Ghazghkull had spent the intervening years well. He had forged alliances with other powerful war bosses, trading access to his teleportation technology in exchange for their forces and loyalty. He had gathered Orc tribes from across the galaxy, uniting them under his banner with a combination of charisma, divine authority, and brutal violence. The combined might of dozens of separate invasions had been concentrated into a single, overwhelming force. The orbital battle raged for 3 days and nights. Imperial ships fought with desperate courage, knowing that every enemy vessel destroyed was thousands of Orcs who would never reach the surface. But there were simply too many. The skies of Armageddon began to fill with the contrails of landing craft, and the ground war began. Ghazghkull's first act was one of pure vengeance. Hades' hive, the site of his previous defeat, the place where Yarrick had held him back and earned the respect of every Orc in the galaxy, was not assaulted. It was not conquered. It was annihilated. Ghazghkull ordered an asteroid launched from an orbiting space hulk directly into the hive city. Millions died in an instant as the impact wiped Hades from the face of Armageddon forever. It was a message. Ghazghkull was done playing games. But even as Hades' hive died, reinforcements were arriving to bolster the defense. More than 20 Space Marine chapters sent forces to Armageddon, recognizing the strategic importance of the world. The Imperial Guard mustered regiments from across the sector. Titan legions powered up their god machines and prepared for war. Sisters of Battle, Inquisition agents, and countless other Imperial organizations committed their forces to the defense. And coordinating it all was Commissar Yarrick. The old man, as the people of Armageddon called him, had arrived on the final transport to touch down before the Orc invasion began. The population cheered as he stepped onto the soil of the world he had saved once before. Yarrick immediately took command of the Planetary Defense Council, and he began implementing strategies that he had been developing for over 50 years. But the fighting that followed was some of the most brutal in Imperial history. On the ash wastes between hive cities, Titan legions dueled with Orc gargants, god machines the size of buildings tearing each other apart with weapons that could devastate city blocks. In the hive cities themselves, floor-by-floor combat raged as Space Marines and Imperial Guard fought against waves of greenskins who seemed to have no concept of retreat or surrender. The skies were filled with constant dogfights between Imperial Navy fighters and Orc aircraft that seemed to fly despite every law of aerodynamics. Hive Hell's Reach became a particular point of brutal conflict. The Black Templars chapter, under the leadership of Chaplain Grimaldus, made their stand there against overwhelming Orc numbers, day after day, night after night. Yet they held the line when all logic said they should have fallen. Grimaldus himself became a legend, a figure of seemingly unstoppable determination who refused to acknowledge the possibility of defeat. But despite heroic efforts across the planet, the war began to settle into a stalemate. Neither side could gain decisive advantage. The Orcs had numbers, but the Imperium had preparation and defensive positions. For every hive that fell, another held firm. For every Orc victory, there was an Imperial counterattack. And Ghazghkull, the prophet of Gork and Mork, began to grow bored. This was not how it was supposed to be. The visions from his gods had shown him a galaxy burning with green fire, an unstoppable tide sweeping all before it. Instead, he was stuck on a single world, fighting the same battles day after day, yes, making incremental gains that meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. Armageddon was becoming a trap, a quagmire that consumed his forces without bringing him closer to his ultimate goal. The headaches returned, more intense than ever before. Gork and Mork were displeased. They had not chosen their prophet to fight endless wars of attrition against a single planet. They had chosen him to unite the entire Orc race, to lead the greatest crusade the galaxy had ever seen. Armageddon was a distraction from that sacred duty. Even Makari, his loyal banner-bearer, tried to talk sense into him. The small grot pointed out that returning to Armageddon again and again was not what the gods wanted. There were bigger targets, greater enemies, a whole galaxy waiting to be conquered. But Ghazghkull, caught up in his rivalry with Yarrick, refused to listen. For his defiance, Makari was killed, though he would later be resurrected when Ghazghkull realized his error. The moment of clarity came during a lull in the fighting. Ghazghkull retreated to his command ship, surrounded himself with weird boys, and opened himself fully to the voices of Gork and Mork. What he experienced was a revelation that changed everything. The gods showed him the truth. Armageddon was not the goal. It was merely one world among billions. The real purpose, the reason Ghazghkull had been chosen, was to unite every Orc in the galaxy under a single banner. He was meant to defeat every other war boss, absorb every other tribe, and create a force so vast that even the gods themselves would descend from their realm to join the fight. This was his destiny. This was what he had been created to accomplish. Ghazghkull made his decision. Leaving his generals to continue the war on Armageddon, Ghazghkull gathered his inner circle and departed the planet. He did not declare victory. He did not admit defeat. He simply left, setting course for new battlefields where his true destiny awaited. Commissar Yarrick, upon learning of Ghazghkull's departure, did something that surprised everyone who knew him. Instead of celebrating the apparent end of the threat, he gathered his own forces and set out in pursuit. The war on Armageddon would continue without him. What mattered now was finishing what had begun so many years before. The rivalry between the old commissar and the Orc prophet would continue across the galaxy. They would meet again. They would fight again. And one day, one of them would finally end the other. But that day was not yet come. Head with Armageddon behind him, Ghazghkull embarked on what would become known as the Great Crusade, the largest Orc mobilization in 8,000 years. His mission was clear: find every major Orc warboss in the galaxy, defeat them, and bring their forces under his control. Only by uniting the entire greenskin race could he fulfill the vision that Gork and Mork had shown him. This was not simply a matter of winning battles. Any Orc could win battles. What Ghazghkull was attempting required something far more sophisticated. He needed to convince his rivals that serving him was better than opposing him. He needed to build a structure that could keep millions of independent-minded greenskins pointed in the same direction. He needed to create an organization that would not collapse the moment his attention was elsewhere. In short, he needed to become something that Orcs are not supposed to be: an administrator. This may seem like a minor detail, but it reveals something crucial about Ghazghkull's character. Most Orc warbosses are excellent at fighting, but terrible at everything else. They win their position through combat, maintain it through intimidation, and lose it the moment a stronger challenger appears. The idea of delegation, of trusting subordinates to carry out orders without direct supervision, is foreign to the greenskin mindset. But Ghazghkull understood that he could not be everywhere at once. He could not personally fight every battle, conquer every world, or intimidate every rival. If his crusade was going to succeed, he needed to create a hierarchy of trusted lieutenants who could act in his name. But he needed to establish a system that would keep functioning even when he was not present. And somehow, against everything we know about Orc psychology, he succeeded. The pursuit, led by Yarrick and High Marshal Helbrecht of the Black Templars, followed him across the stars. They came closest to catching him at the Battle of Haunted Gulf, where it seemed that Ghazghkull's luck had finally run out. His flagship, Kill Wrecker, was cornered by Imperial forces. Escape seemed impossible. And then the gods intervened. During the height of the battle, with Imperial weapons tearing into his ship, Ghazghkull received a message through his weird boys that seemed to come from Gork and Mork themselves. They told him that it was not his time to die, that the whole galaxy must echo to the battle cry of the orcs. But they charged him with gathering an army like no other and commanded him to lead their chosen people in a battle that would last forever. Kill Wrecker vanished in a burst of green warp energy. The Imperial pursuers could only watch in frustration as their quarry escaped to fight another day. The vessel reappeared in the Orc Empire of Octarius, a region of space that had been under greenskin control for thousands of years. Ruling this empire was the Overfiend of Octarius, a powerful war boss who had carved out his own domain, while Ghazghkull had been focused on Armageddon. Most orcs would have seen this as an obstacle. Ghazghkull saw it as an opportunity. His first target was not the Overfiend himself, but another powerful war boss named Urgok the Slayer. Ghazghkull's approach was characteristically direct. Yet he teleported himself and his most fearsome warriors directly into Urgok's throne room, catching the rival war boss completely by surprise. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration of absolute dominance. Ghazghkull tore through Urgok's bodyguards with contemptuous ease, his power claw leaving only scattered remains where proud warriors had stood moments before. Urgok himself tried to fight back, but he was no match for the prophet of Gork and Mork. Within moments, Ghazghkull stood over his beaten rival, offering a choice: join the Great Crusade or die. Urgok chose wisely. The pattern repeated across Octarius and beyond. Warboss after warboss fell before Ghazghkull's assault, each one given the same choice. Most chose to join, recognizing that opposing the prophet was suicide. Those few who refused became examples, as their broken bodies displayed as warnings to any who might consider resistance. But Octarius offered more than just orc rivals. The sector was also the site of an ongoing war between the Greenskins and the Tyrannids of Hive Fleet Leviathan. These alien horrors, driven by an all-consuming hunger, had invaded orc space seeking biomass to fuel their endless expansion. The resulting conflict had devastated both sides, creating a war of attrition that had raged for years. Ghazghkull entered this conflict with characteristic enthusiasm. For the prophet of Gork and Mork, the war in Octarius represented something unique, an opportunity to fight an enemy that was in some ways the equal of his own kind. The Tyrannids were not like the humans, who could be broken psychologically or outmaneuvered politically. They were not like the Eldari, who could be predicted through their adherence to ancient patterns and traditions. The Tyrannids were simply hunger given form, an enemy that would never retreat, never negotiate, and never stop attacking until every living thing had been consumed. This was the kind of challenge that Ghazghkull relished. The battles that followed were some of the most brutal in the galaxy's recent history. Orc and Tyrannid clashed across dozens of worlds, their armies consuming each other in waves of violence that left entire ecosystems dead. The fighting was constant, relentless, without pause or mercy. Neither side took prisoners. Neither side cared about casualties. They simply threw themselves at each other again and again, an endless cycle of slaughter that seemed to have no end. And through it all, Ghazghkull grew stronger. This is one of the most terrifying aspects of orc biology. The greenskins do not simply survive combat, they thrive on it. The more an orc fights, the larger and more powerful it becomes. Victory feeds their growth. Even defeat, if they survive it, makes them stronger. It is as if violence itself is food to them, nourishment that allows them to evolve into ever more formidable forms. Ghazghkull had been fighting continuously for decades. The psychic power flowing through him from Gork and Mork amplified this natural growth. By the time he reached Octarius, he was already one of the largest orcs anyone had ever seen. The war against the Tyrannids pushed him even further. The Tyrannids represented a different kind of enemy than the Imperium. They did not retreat or surrender. They did not negotiate or bluff. They simply attacked, consumed, and moved on to the next target. Fighting them was pure, uncomplicated warfare of the kind that orcs loved best. In one notable incident, Ghazghkull was swallowed whole by a massive Morlock, a tunneling Tyrannid creature capable of devouring entire vehicles. Most beings would have considered this the end. Ghazghkull simply tore his way out from the inside, emerging from the creature's corpse covered in alien ichor and bellowing challenges to anything else that wanted to try. The hive mind, that vast gestalt consciousness that controls all Tyrannids, took notice. It had underestimated this particular orc. It would not make that mistake again. But even as Ghazghkull fought the Tyrannids, his true purpose remained the unification of his race. The Overfiend of Octarius, impressed by Ghazghkull's victories against the alien swarms, all swore allegiance without even fighting. Other warbosses followed, drawn by the prophet's reputation and the undeniable evidence of his divine favor. The Great Crusade was succeeding beyond anything anyone had anticipated. When the Death Watch, those elite Xenos hunters who had been created specifically to combat threats like the Beast, assessed Ghazghkull's growing power, they were horrified. The fleet he now commanded numbered in the millions of ships. His armies made the invasion force that had attacked Armageddon look insignificant. In terms of sheer scale, this was the largest orc mobilization since the War of the Beast itself. And it was still growing. Through all of his conquests and campaigns, Ghazghkull has been accompanied by a most unlikely companion. Makari the Grot stands barely waist-high to an average human, as a tiny figure compared to the towering mountain of green muscle and adamantium that is his master. Yet their bond transcends the normal relationship between orcs and their diminutive servants. Makari was the first to witness Ghazghkull's resurrection. He was there in that trash heap behind Grotsnik's operating shed, the first to see the prophet open his eye and share his vision of a burning galaxy. When Ghazghkull gave him a name and a purpose, Makari was transformed from a nameless scavenger into something unique among his kind, a grot who mattered. Their relationship is unlike anything else in orc society. Grots are normally treated as disposable, used for menial tasks and target practice, their lives worth less than the ammunition it would take to kill them. But Ghazghkull treats Makari with something approaching respect. He has gifted the small creature with relics of immense significance, including fragments of the bolt shell that changed his destiny. He relies on Makari to record his visions and carry his banner into battle. Most remarkably of all, Ghazghkull has developed the ability to bring Makari back from the dead. Orcs believe in a form of reincarnation. They think that when an orc dies, his soul is gathered up by Gork and Mork and eventually returned to the mortal realm to fight again. For most greenskins, this is a vague spiritual concept with no practical application. But Ghazghkull, with his prophet's connection to the gods, has made it something more literal. When Makari dies, and he has died many times over the course of Ghazghkull's campaigns, the prophet can simply will him back into existence. A new grot will be born somewhere in the greenskin population, and Ghazghkull will find him, mark him with his burning claw, and restore Makari's memories and identity. The process takes time and effort, but it means that Makari is, for all practical purposes, immortal. This has led to some unusual situations. During periods when Ghazghkull was angry or distracted, Makari has killed himself rather than endure his master's displeasure, knowing that he would eventually be brought back. When Grotsnik murdered Makari out of jealousy for the attention Ghazghkull gave him, the prophet tracked down the reincarnated grot and restored him to his position. The loyalty flows in both directions. Makari has saved Ghazghkull's life on multiple occasions, crawling into places too small for orcs to reach, eliminating threats that might otherwise have ended the prophet's crusade. During the battle where a Lehman Russ tank blasted a hole in Ghazghkull's chest, it was Makari who climbed inside the vehicle and killed the crew within. When the Inquisition eventually captured Makari and attempted to interrogate him about Ghazghkull's plans and weaknesses, they found a creature utterly devoted to his master. The story he told them, recorded in a Black Library document titled Prophet of the Great Crusade, remains one of the primary sources of information about Ghazghkull's history. But if Makari revealed any useful intelligence, there is no record of it being used effectively. The banner that Makari carries is more than a simple standard. Known as the Lucky Stick, it was created from the original recording of Ghazghkull's vision, written in the Prophet's own blood on a sheet of scrap metal. Orcs who fight within sight of this banner are inspired to greater feats of violence, their belief in Ghazghkull's divine mission amplifying their natural aggression. There is something almost touching about the relationship between the galaxy's most dangerous orc and his tiny companion. In a universe defined by endless war and suffering, where cruelty is the norm and kindness is considered weakness, Ghazghkull has formed what can only be described as a genuine friendship. It may be the only such relationship he is capable of having, and it speaks to something important about his character. Ghazghkull is not simply a mindless brute. He is capable of loyalty, of generosity, of recognizing value in those who serve him faithfully. These are not qualities that most would associate with orcs, but they are qualities that have made Ghazghkull something more than just another war boss. They are qualities that make him truly dangerous. During the Psychic Awakening, that galaxy-spanning event that saw psychic powers amplifying across all species and factions, the Space Wolves chapter became aware of a growing threat. Their rune priests, those warrior mystics who channel the power of Fenris, were ravaged by visions of a great green fire spreading between the stars. Every reading of the runes pointed to the same conclusion. The orcs were becoming more united than ever before, and there could only be one being behind such an unprecedented mobilization. The Space Wolves, those fierce warriors who trace their lineage to the Primarch Leman Russ, made ending Ghazghkull's crusade their primary objective. Their pursuit eventually led them to the planet Krongar, where intelligence indicated the Prophet was personally leading a campaign. Leading the Space Wolves was Wolf Lord Ragnar Blackmane, one of the youngest and most aggressive leaders in the chapter's history. Ragnar had earned his position through exceptional combat prowess and an almost reckless bravery that inspired those who followed him. He was exactly the kind of warrior who might be able to match Ghazghkull in single combat. Ragnar's history was already legendary by the time he came to hunt Ghazghkull. He had risen through the ranks of the Space Wolves faster than any warrior in living memory, bypassing the traditional progression to become a Wolf Lord while still young by Astartes standards. His accomplishments filled sagas that were sung around the hearthfires of Fenris, tales of battles won against impossible odds and enemies slain in personal combat. But Ragnar had never faced anything like Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. The Space Wolves are among the most fierce, close combat warriors in the entire Imperium. They train constantly in the brutal martial traditions of their frozen homeworld, where every moment of weakness can mean death. They carry weapons that have been blessed by rune priests and sanctified with the blood of countless foes. They are, by any reasonable measure, among the deadliest warriors the galaxy has ever produced. And yet, against Ghazghkull, even this might not be enough. The two met in the ruins of an imperial cathedral that the orcs had overrun. Ghazghkull, demonstrating the tactical cunning that set him apart from other war bosses, deliberately separated himself and Ragnar from their respective forces by detonating explosives that sealed the cathedral entrances. Whatever happened next would be a duel, not a battle. What followed was one of the most brutal one-on-one confrontations in recent Imperial history. Ragnar opened by targeting Ghazghkull's armor, his frostblade cutting through the hydraulic cables that powered the war boss's massive suit. The damage slowed Ghazghkull, limiting his mobility and the power of his strikes. It was a smart tactical choice, the kind of move that might give a smaller opponent a chance against a larger one. But it did not stop Ghazghkull. The Prophet pressed forward despite his damaged armor, his massive power claw reaching for the space wolf. Yet Ragnar dodged and weaved, using his superior speed to avoid the crushing blows that could have ended the fight instantly. But Ghazghkull was patient. He had fought countless enemies and understood that even the fastest warrior would eventually make a mistake. When Ragnar's mistake came, it was nearly fatal. Ghazghkull caught the Wolf Lord in his claw and began to squeeze. Ragnar's armor, some of the finest protection the Imperium could provide, began to buckle under the pressure. Bones cracked, blood flowed. The Wolf Lord's arm was sheared completely off by the force of the grip. But Ragnar Blackmane was not finished. With his remaining arm, fighting through pain that would have incapacitated lesser beings, Ragnar raised his frost blade and swung with every ounce of strength he could muster. The blow caught Ghazghkull at the neck, slicing through flesh and metal with a single stroke. The prophet's head fell from his shoulders. Ragnar lifted his trophy high and howled in victory even as his broken body collapsed. He had done what countless warriors had failed to do. He had killed Ghazghkull mag Uruk Thraka, or so he thought. The space wolves recovered Ragnar's shattered form and immediately began emergency treatment. The Wolf Lord was so badly injured that even interment in a dreadnought would not have saved him. There was only one option, the Rubicon Primaris, that dangerous procedure which transforms a standard space marine into a larger, more powerful Primaris marine. The surgery took days, and Ragnar hovered between life and death throughout. But when he finally awoke, the first thing Ragnar learned was that his victory had been temporary. Ghazghkull was alive. The prophet's headless body had been recovered by his followers and transported to Mad Doc Grotsnik. For 10 days and nights, Grotsnik worked his mad science, employing techniques that defied medical understanding. He connected Ghazghkull's severed head to a new body, a massive construct of metal and flesh that made his previous form look small by comparison. Green lightning filled the sky as Grotsnik channeled power from a generator that existed partially in the warp, pumping energy into Ghazghkull's reconstructed form. And the prophet of Gork and Mork opened his eyes once more. His resurrection was met with attempted betrayal. An ambitious Orc commando named Def Colonel Zogbos stormed Grotsnik's laboratory, intent on taking control of the Great Crusade for himself. He destroyed equipment, killed guards, and finally reached the inner sanctum where Ghazghkull's surgery was being completed. Zogbos never got to strike his blow. Ghazghkull's hand shot out, grabbing the would-be usurper by the head and crushing it like an overripe fruit. The message was clear. The prophet had returned, and nothing would stand in his way. Ghazghkull's new body was even larger than before, approaching the size of a small dreadnought. His weapons had been upgraded, his armor improved, his connection to Gork and Mork seemingly strengthened by his brush with death. If anything, being killed had only made him more dangerous. Ragnar Blackmane, now reborn as a Primaris Marine, swore to finish what he had started. He redirected an orbital station so that it crashed into Krongar's surface, attempting to destroy Ghazghkull once and for all. It did not work. The prophet escaped, and the rivalry between the Wolf Lord and the War Boss continues to this day. We come now to the heart of our story, to the connection that makes Ghazghkull more than just another powerful war boss. We must examine the evidence that points to a terrifying truth, that Ghazghkull mag Uruk Thraka is not merely following in the footsteps of the beast. He is becoming the beast. This is not metaphor. This is not poetic license. The evidence that has accumulated over decades of observation points to something unprecedented, a reincarnation, or perhaps a recreation of the most dangerous orc to ever threaten the galaxy. The first and most obvious connection is the name itself. When the beast announced his presence to the defenders of Terra in the 32nd Millennium, he broadcast a message across all frequencies. In the guttural tongue of the orcs, he proclaimed himself with a phrase that the Imperial translators eventually decoded. That phrase was Mag Uruk Thraka. It means, I am slaughter. Let us be absolutely clear about what this means. When Ghazghkull took his name, or was given it by the gods he claims to serve, he was not simply choosing a title that sounded impressive. He was claiming a legacy. He was announcing that he was the inheritor of the beast's mantle, the continuation of a mission that had been interrupted 8,000 years ago, but never truly ended. Orcs do not normally care about history. They live in the present, focused on immediate conflicts and immediate rewards. The idea of an orc deliberately invoking ancient precedent, consciously connecting himself to a figure from the distant past, is almost unheard of. And yet, here we have Ghazghkull, bearing the same title that the beast proclaimed to the terrified defenders of humanity's homeworld. This is not coincidence. In the Orcish language, names carry power. They define who and what an orc is. When Ghazghkull chose his name, or was given it by the gods, he was claiming a legacy that stretched back 8,000 years. He was declaring himself the inheritor of the beast's mantle. But the connections go deeper than naming conventions. The Farseer Eldrad Ulthran, perhaps the most powerful psyker among the Eldari, has been watching this situation develop for longer than anyone realizes. Shortly after the beast was finally defeated, Eldrad addressed the seers of Craftworld Ulthwi with words that have proven prophetic. Beasts never die, he told them. They are only banished. The cry of Mag Uruk Thraka echoes still in the other sea. Should one rise again, the greenskins may yet fulfill their original purpose. The other sea is the Ealdari term for the warp, that dimension of pure psychic energy that underlies reality. Eldrad was saying that the essence of the beast, the concept it represented, was not destroyed when its physical forms were killed. It continued to exist in the psychic realm, waiting for a new vessel. That vessel is Ghazghkull. It was Eldrad who manipulated events to redirect Ghazghkull's first great crusade away from Eldari targets and toward Imperial worlds. The Farseer calculated that the Imperium could survive an orc invasion, that humanity could absorb the punishment that Ghazghkull would inflict, while the Eldar could not. He deliberately set Ghazghkull on the path to Armageddon, but knowing full well the destruction that would follow. Why would Eldrad do this? Because he sees something in Ghazghkull that terrifies even him. He sees the potential for an orc leader who could truly unite the entire greenskin race. He sees the possibility of a great crusade that would dwarf anything the galaxy has witnessed since the beast itself. And he knows that when that day comes, all other conflicts will become meaningless in comparison. There are other signs that Ghazghkull's transformation is accelerating. Multiple Imperial sources report sightings of Ghazghkull in different locations simultaneously. This was one of the terrifying aspects of the beast. There were 6 of them, 6 prime orcs, who could be in different places at the same time while sharing a single identity. Is Ghazghkull developing the same ability? Or are there multiple versions of him now, each one pursuing different objectives while serving the same ultimate goal? The psychic phenomena surrounding Ghazghkull have also intensified dramatically. Weird boys who come near him report being overwhelmed by visions of a burning galaxy. Orcs across entire sectors can sense his presence, drawn to him by an instinct they cannot explain. The gestalt field of psychic energy that all orcs generate, normally diffuse and unfocused, seems to be concentrating around Ghazghkull, like gravity around a singularity. The Death Watch has compared the current size of Ghazghkull's fleet to historical records. Their conclusion is terrifying. This is the largest orc mobilization since the beast. More than 5 million ships fly under Ghazghkull's banner. His armies number in the untold billions. Or if even a fraction of this force were to attack a single target, it would overwhelm any defense the Imperium could muster. And Ghazghkull is still growing, still gathering more orcs under his control, still moving toward the moment when every greenskin in the galaxy answers to a single prophet. The orcs are, in their way, designed for exactly this. The old ones who created them in the ancient past intended the greenskins to be the ultimate warriors, capable of overwhelming any threat through sheer numbers and aggression. But to reach their full potential, the orcs need unity. They need a leader who can channel their collective psychic energy toward a single purpose. The beast was such a leader. Ghazghkull is becoming such a leader. If he succeeds, if he truly unites the orc race as his visions demand, the consequences are almost impossible to contemplate. The Imperium, currently besieged on all fronts by chaos, Tyrannids, Necrons, and countless other threats, would face an enemy with effectively unlimited numbers and the psychic power of a god. The Eldari, the Tau, every civilization in the galaxy would face extinction at the hands of a green tide that could never be stopped. And perhaps most terrifying of all, Ghazghkull's stated goal is not merely conquest. He wants to create a war so vast, so all-encompassing, that Gork and Mork themselves will descend from the warp to join the fighting. He wants to bring the orc gods into the material realm, to manifest the great green that he has seen in his visions. No one knows what would happen if he succeeded. But the very fact that it might be possible should keep every living being in the galaxy awake at night. We must consider what the future holds if Ghazghkull continues on his current path. The patterns of his ascent, the scale of his ambitions, and the evidence of his growing power all point toward an outcome that would reshape the galaxy forever. The trajectory is unmistakable. Each year, Ghazghkull grows stronger. Each campaign adds more followers to his banner. Each victory reinforces his legend and makes it easier to recruit the next wave of warriors. He is not simply maintaining his position, he is accelerating, building momentum toward a critical mass that may be impossible to stop once it is fully reached. Think about what this means in practical terms. How an orc gathering that grows too large cannot be defeated by conventional military force. The numbers simply become too overwhelming. Even the most disciplined army, equipped with the finest weapons and led by the most brilliant commanders, will eventually be drowned in a sea of green bodies. The only way to stop such a force is to prevent it from forming in the first place. And yet, every attempt to do so has failed. The Imperium is not prepared for what is coming. This is not to diminish the courage and sacrifice of the countless warriors who have fought against Ghazghkull. The defenders of Armageddon, the space wolves who have pursued him across the stars, the Death Watch who monitor his every movement. All of these have given everything in their efforts to stop the prophet. But the cold mathematical reality is that the Imperium is already stretched too thin. Too many fronts, too many enemies, too many crises demanding attention. Ghazghkull knows this. His visions have shown him the state of his enemies, their weaknesses and divisions. He knows that the Imperium is torn between fighting the forces of chaos, containing the Tyrannid hive fleets, and dealing with the awakening Necron dynasties. He knows that Robute Guilliman, the returned Primarch who represents humanity's best hope, cannot be everywhere at once. And he knows that time is on his side. Every year that passes sees more orcs joining the Great Crusade. Every victory adds to Ghazghkull's legend, making it easier to convince rival war bosses to submit rather than fight. Every world that falls to the green tide provides resources for further expansion. The momentum is building towards something unprecedented. The comparison to the Beast becomes more apt with each passing campaign. The Beast created attack moons and technologies that the Mechanicus could not replicate. Ghazghkull's forces have shown similar innovation, developing teleportation devices and psychic weaponry that should not be possible for orcs. The Beast commanded millions of ships and billions of warriors. Ghazghkull's numbers are already comparable and still growing. The Beast almost destroyed the Imperium at a time when humanity was stronger, more unified, and less beset by other threats. What happens when Ghazghkull, potentially even more powerful, attacks an Imperium that is weaker and more divided? As some within the Inquisition have begun to seriously consider the unthinkable, that Ghazghkull cannot be stopped by conventional means, they whisper of desperate measures, of forbidden technologies, of alliances with enemies that would once have been considered heresy. The Farseer Eldrad's willingness to sacrifice imperial worlds to redirect Ghazghkull suggests that even ancient alien wisdom sees no easy solution. But there is another possibility, one that is perhaps even more disturbing. What if Ghazghkull is not supposed to be stopped? The orcs were created by the Old Ones for a purpose: to fight the enemies of life itself. Throughout their history, the Greenskins have served as a strange kind of immune response for the galaxy, attacking threats that might otherwise overwhelm all other civilizations. They fought the Necrons during the war in Heaven. They have contained Tyrannid invasions that might otherwise have consumed entire sectors. Their endless violence, while destructive, prevents any single threat from growing too powerful. Eldred spoke of the orcs fulfilling their original purpose. Perhaps that purpose was always to produce a being like the beast, or like Ghazghkull. Perhaps the Greenskins were designed to unite periodically, to become an overwhelming force that could deal with threats beyond the capability of any other species. In this view, Ghazghkull is not a disaster to be prevented, but a weapon to be aimed. The question becomes not how to stop him, but how to direct his inevitable destruction toward the right targets. This is, of course, a desperate philosophy. It assumes that Ghazghkull can be manipulated, as that his crusade can be pointed away from one's own civilization and towards someone else's. It assumes that the destruction he causes can be controlled, limited, channeled. It assumes that survival means making someone else the target of the green tide. But in the grim darkness of the far future, such calculations are common. Survival often means making terrible choices. The Imperium has sacrificed worlds before to save sectors. The Aeldari have redirected threats toward humanity before, without hesitation. If Ghazghkull truly becomes the beast reborn, the only question may be who gets destroyed first. And so we return to where we began, to the figure who stands at the center of our story, Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka, the prophet of Gork and Mork, the war boss who would become the beast. We have traveled far together, through millennia of history and across the breadth of the galaxy. We have witnessed horrors that would break lesser minds and marvels that defy understanding. We have watched an empire nearly fall and a new threat rise from the ashes of the old. And through it all, one figure has dominated our attention. Consider what we have learned about this being who threatens everything. Here is an orc who began as nobody, a lowly boy in a dying world's armies, indistinguishable from the countless other greenskins who fought and died without leaving any mark upon the galaxy. He had no special destiny that anyone could see. He had no power that set him apart from his fellows. He was, in every way that mattered, completely ordinary. And then, a bolt round changed everything. That moment of violence, as that instant when Imperial ammunition tore through orc flesh, was the hinge upon which history would turn. A few centimeters in any direction, and Ghazghkull would simply have died, another nameless casualty in an endless war. Instead, the damage was both catastrophic and transformative. It destroyed enough of his brain to kill him, but not quite quickly enough. It created the opportunity for Mad Doc Grotznik to work his terrible art. And it awakened something that had been dormant within the greenskin genome since the time of the Old Ones. From that moment of death and resurrection, Ghazghkull has been climbing toward a destiny that was ordained before he was born. He conquered the tribes of Urk, escaped the dying world, and led his followers to Armageddon. He fought the Imperium's finest and emerged stronger from every defeat. But he gathered enemies and rivals alike under his banner, building an army that dwarfs anything the galaxy has seen in 8,000 years. He died again on Krongar, his head separated from his body by a space wolf's blade. And he rose again, larger and more powerful than before, his connection to Gork and Mork apparently strengthened by the experience. It seems that death only makes him more dangerous. Now he leads the Great Crusade, the largest orc mobilization since the beast itself. Millions of ships fly his banner. Billions of orcs answer his call. The psychic energy of an entire race is focusing around him like a lens concentrating light into a burning point. And through it all, he remains guided by a single vision. Every orc united, the whole galaxy burning with green fire, as the gods themselves descending to join the eternal war that is their purpose. There is something almost admirable about such dedication, such absolute commitment to a goal. Ghazghkull has never wavered, never doubted, never turned aside from the path he believes he was chosen to walk. He has endured setbacks that would have destroyed lesser beings and emerged from each one more certain than ever of his ultimate triumph. Of course, admiration is a dangerous response to something that threatens everything you hold dear. Ghazghkull is not a hero by any standard that humans would recognize. He has killed billions. He has destroyed worlds. He will continue to do so until either the galaxy falls or he does. But understanding our enemies is the first step to defeating them. And Ghazghkull, perhaps more than any other threat the Imperium faces, requires understanding. He is not a mindless brute. He is not a simple monster. He is a being with vision, purpose, and the power to reshape the galaxy according to his will. The question that haunts those who watch him is simple. Can he be stopped? The answer, increasingly, appears to be that no one knows. Every attempt to kill him has failed. Every effort to contain his crusade has only delayed it. The forces arrayed against him, mighty as they are, seem insufficient for the task. Perhaps the only hope lies in the nature of the orcs themselves. They are, despite everything, chaotic creatures who struggle with unity. The Great Crusade could collapse under its own weight, torn apart by the same infighting that has always prevented the Greenskins from reaching their full potential. Ghazghkull might fall to a rival warboss, or grow bored with conquest, or simply make a mistake that no amount of divine favor can save him from. Or perhaps the hope lies in the heroes who refuse to give up. Commissar Yarrick, ancient now, but still pursuing his nemesis across the stars. Ragnar Blackmane, reborn in Primaris form and sworn to finish what he started. The countless warriors of the Imperium who will stand against the green tide no matter the odds. In the end, perhaps that is all that matters. The choice to keep fighting, to refuse despair even in the face of something that seems unstoppable. The galaxy has survived threats before that seemed certain to destroy it. It may survive this one as well. But if Ghazghkull truly becomes the beast reborn, if he achieves the unity that has always eluded the orcs, if his visions of Gork and Mork descending to join the eternal war come to pass, then everything will change. The only certainty is that the war is not over. It will never be over, not until one side or the other is completely destroyed. And in that eternal conflict, Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka will continue to be the name spoken in terror across 100,000 worlds. The prophet, the beast of Armageddon, the orc who may yet bring about the end of everything. His story continues, his legend grows, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, he is preparing for battles that will shake the very foundations of reality. The galaxy holds its breath and waits. For somewhere in the void between the stars, Ghazghkull continues his eternal crusade. His fleet grows larger with each passing day. His legend spreads to orcs who have never heard of Armageddon or Octarius, and his visions guide him ever onward, toward a destiny that will shake the very foundations of reality. The prophet has spoken, the gods have chosen their champion, and the galaxy will never be the same. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most fascinating and terrifying figures in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka represents something unique among the threats that humanity faces. An enemy who thinks, who plans, who genuinely believes in a purpose greater than simple destruction. Understanding him is essential to understanding the galaxy's possible futures. We have traveled together through 8,000 years of history, and from the terror of the beast that nearly broke humanity to the rise of a new prophet who carries that same terrible legacy. We have walked the killing fields of Armageddon, witnessed the fury of battles that consumed billions of souls, and glimpsed a future that threatens everything the Imperium has built over 10 millennia of struggle. Ghazghkull, is not simply a villain to be defeated. He is a force of nature, as inevitable and implacable as the tide. He represents the possibility that the orcs, those countless billions of greenskins who infest every corner of the galaxy, might finally achieve the unity that has always eluded them. And if that day comes, all other concerns will become meaningless in the face of the green tide. The question that remains is not whether Ghazghkull can be stopped, but whether anything can stop him. Each year he grows stronger. Each campaign adds to his legend. Each victory brings him closer to the fulfillment of the prophecy that burns in his adamantium skull. Perhaps one day, a hero will arise who can end this threat forever. Perhaps the Imperium will find some weakness in the prophet's armor, some flaw that can be exploited to bring down the gathering storm. Perhaps the gods that Ghazghkull serves will abandon him, as gods are prone to do with those who fail them. Or perhaps the galaxy will learn what it means to face an enemy that truly cannot be defeated. Only time will tell. If you found this exploration interesting, I would be deeply grateful if you would like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows me to continue creating content about the 41st millennium and beyond. There are countless more stories to tell, countless more legends to explore, and your engagement makes all of it possible. Every like helps the channel grow. Every subscription brings us one step closer to exploring more of these vast and fascinating stories. Every comment tells me what you want to hear about next, what aspects of this incredible universe you want to dive deeper into. Until next time, may the Emperor protect you, and may you never hear the thunder of approaching boots that announces the arrival of the Great Crusade. Stay safe out there among the stars.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.